Hey guys, Greg from FactionFab here with another new product video. Here in front of me, I have the FactionFab Turbo Adapters for the Ford F-150 and Raptor Ecoboost models. Now the stock adapter is a known restriction in the exhaust. Freeing it up can bring your truck up to its full potential, even in stock form without any tuning. This is a mod that every Ecoboost owner should do. Now we're gonna jump right in and compare our adapter to the OEM adapter. If you get up close here, the first thing you're gonna notice is the increased bore size going all the way through. The FactionFab adapter is 23% bigger than the OEM adapter. Then if you'll notice, we have a nice taper going from the oval-shaped top down to the circular bottom. This taper is going to make sure you have smooth airflow coming from the turbo to the downpipe to prevent turbulence, backflow, or other bad things that you don't want in your exhaust. So this design was one of many revisions used in hours of CAD simulation, where we were able to optimize the flow of air through the center portion from the turbo to the downpipe. And compared to the OEM, we were able to see a 55.8% reduction in pressure on the turbo side of the adapter, while maintaining a constant velocity. What this means is better airflow through the adapter, which means more power for you. And we also validate these claims by taking our truck to the dyno. Our test Raptor was able to obtain a max gain of 30 horsepower at 5,300 RPMs and 23 foot-pounds of torque at 5,600 RPMs compared to stock. But one of the biggest things you'll notice while driving the truck is that peak torque hits 212 RPMs earlier compared to stock. This earlier and faster power is what's going to make the biggest difference while you're driving your truck. Now you've seen similar results like this before, but here's something you haven't seen. A custom designed stud that is guaranteed to make your install easier. Looking at the OEM stud, there's really no good way to get this off or on the turbo. There's two little flats here on the end that Ford requires a special tool to use, but this also often strips or just snaps the stud, leaving the threaded portion in the turbo, which can be a huge nightmare to remove. So we designed a custom stud to eliminate these problems and make your install easier. The center portion here is now built with a 15mm hex. Any common 15mm socket or wrench will work on this center section. So that center section, in addition to a 6mm hex on the head, is going to make sure that you can get this off or on repeatedly, no matter what. Now we also chose to construct the studs using a 303 stainless, which is a machinable version of the 304 stainless that you're probably more familiar with. And what this means is it's going to resist any galvanic corrosion that comes from the aluminum turbo to the steel adapter, and it will also be resistant to the heat cycles that come through it, salt, snow, whatever you can throw at this, it is always going to come out when you want it to. Now the hardware kit also comes with some extra pieces to complete your install. Some new nuts, Ford OEM gaskets for a perfect seal, and an anti-seize lubricant packet, which we always recommend on this install. So these are available separately or together as a kit. And one last thing I want to mention is our hardware kit is compatible with other turbo adapters. So if you already have a set, you're taking them off to maybe do a downpipe or something, and you want to upgrade your hardware, it will be compatible just the same as the OEM stud. So let's go over to the install on our Raptor so you can see how to get this on your truck. So here in front of me, I have the tools that we're going to be using for the turbo adapter install. The first thing is going to be some ratchets. We are using both a 3/8 and a 1/2 inch, as well as a large breaker bar. To go along with those ratchets, we have sockets in 10, 13, 15, 18, and 21mm sizes. These also are going to be both 3/8 and 1/2 inch sizes, as well as long and short and medium. The more options you have for this, the easier it's going to be. Next, we have some ratcheting wrenches in those same sizes. We are going to be using some wobblies and extensions, also 1/2 inch and 3/8. And the same situation with the sockets, where the more sizes and options you have, the better. The last thing is going to be a good, reliable torque wrench. Having proper torque specs on some of these bolts is going to save yourself a lot of headache down the road so that things don't back out, as well as come out the way they're supposed to next time you go to remove these items. Now, if you've looked into this install, you've probably heard some nightmare stories. It's pretty simple once you get under the truck, but there can be some problems, usually relating to these stock turbo adapters. Now, we even have some trouble with these ourselves, so we're gonna give you some tips based on our experience on how to make this an easier job. The first is going to be the penetrating fluid. If you can make this a 2-day job, we highly recommend putting some of this on those studs and letting them sit overnight. It's gonna make them so much easier as it penetrates into the threads and releases it from the turbo. The next is going to be a good extractor. We had 2 different kinds that we tried to use. The first was this kind here that goes onto the threads, and then as you release, it grabs the threads and then is supposed to pull the turbo. Unfortunately, when we were using this one, it basically just destroyed the threads and then eventually slipped, not pulling the stud out of the turbo. We actually had better luck with a Craftsman bolt extractor. This is gonna have teeth on one side, is hollow all the way through with a large hex on the other side. So as this goes on to the fat portion of the stud, give it a couple light taps with a hammer, and then as you reverse thread it, those teeth are going to grab the stud and then pull it out of the turbo. The one that we ended up using was a Craftsman kit, and this is the number 9 extractor in the kit, which is used for a 15mm bolt or nut. Now, another huge help is going to be the big breaker bar and making use of those extensions and wobblies. When you finally get a good grip on the stud with this extractor, having a good breaker bar to control your force without needing to try too hard is going to make sure, number 1, it doesn't slip off, and number 2, it's not gonna break loose and you're not gonna bash a knuckle. So this is gonna be a huge help. Now, another thing that's gonna help is going to be a hammer or a dead blow mallet. I did mention earlier a few taps on the extractor to help it seat itself on the stud is also going to break some of the bond. But if you go a different route, just using the hammer or mallet on the stud can help break that bond to make it easier to come out. And the last thing is going to be some heat. A propane or even better, a MAP torch used on the turbo side to expand the turbo will break the bond between the turbo and the stud, making it come out easier. And one more thing to use for future install is going to be some anti-seize. We include a little packet with all of our hardware kits for use on these studs, and this is going to make sure that the studs don't permanently bond to the turbo the next time. Now, it may be possible to remove the downpipe adapters by removing the heat shields and then just simply loosening the downpipes to get them out of the way. But we think it's easier to remove the downpipes completely. That way, if you have a seized stud or something like that, you have plenty of room to get that out. So because there's a lot of potential for rust or seized bolts, we are going to be doing some penetrating fluid on any of the bolts that we're going to need to undo. This is probably best to do like the night before you start the project on the truck. That gives it plenty of time to really get in between. That way you don't have to deal with any of the seized bolts. So we're gonna start by taking off some of these protection shields. This first one here is gonna have 4 13mm on this side and this side. The big black one is also going to have 13mm, 2 on each side, and then 2 10mm bolts on the front. Now with that front heat shield out of the way, you can see these downpipe adapters right here. This is the downpipe, flange, and then this is the adapter that we're gonna be removing. So these are some of the bolts you're definitely gonna wanna hit with some of the penetrating fluid. So before we can remove the downpipes, we need to get a few of these things out of the way. We're gonna start with this wiring harness, which is a 10mm bolt on each side. transmission mount to crossmember bolts will need to be undone using a 21mm. And the transmission crossmember can be unbolted. This is going to use a 15mm on the head of the bolt with an 18mm on the nut on the back. Now before we remove the cross brace from the chassis, we need to make sure we support the transmission. You also have some heat shields that are bolted to the cross member. There's this one here, and then 2 on this side, and they will need to be undone with a 10mm before you can remove the cross member. These 2 bolts here are going to be on the 13mm. And the slip joint here is going to be done with a 15mm. So because this downpipe is hung on the transmission mount, we're just gonna go ahead and unbolt the transmission mount from the transmission. It's gonna be a little bit easier to get this off. We're ready to take off the downpipe, and those nuts are gonna be done with the 15mm, and the longer extension you have, the better. You'll want to trace all the O2 sensors back and unhook them from the wiring harness. That way the whole downpipe can come down. There are going to be 2 on each side, and the front ones go all the way up into the engine bay. So now that the downpipe's out of the way, we're ready to pull the stock turbo adapter. It is held in by these stock studs. Now the end of this stock stud has 2 flat sides, and there's a special tool to pull that if you want to. We're not going to be reusing these studs since we have our own, so we're going to be using a regular bolt extractor. The best one we have found is just like this here, where it has an external hex on the outside, and it will grab right onto that fatter portion of the stud, and then we'll be able to throw our new ones right in. Now we're ready to put on our new adapters with an OEM gasket and our fancy stud. So we did separate the driver's side downpipe from the rest of the setup just to make it easier to get in. It's a little bit lighter and you don't have to worry about fitting it around the transmission. We have the downpipes mostly in place with some nuts on each end and most of the connections in. So the first thing we're gonna do is make sure we plug in all the O2 sensors, and then we will connect everything else. And then after that is when we'll start tightening and torquing everything down. Now that we have everything mostly in its place, we are ready to start tightening down. We're gonna start with these turbo adapter nuts, 15 millimeter, and again, you'll want a long extension. So now we can finish tightening everything up for the exhaust, which means all of our slip flanges, and then it's putting the trans cross member back on and then finishing everything up. When you start to get to all these heat shields and the cross member, each one of them is gonna have a stamp on a portion of it. So this one says front this way, so we know that it is going to lay like this. Now, if you have any questions about the install, feel free to contact us on Facebook, Instagram, or comment below, and we will be happy to help you out. We hope this video will make the install easier on your turbo adapter or hardware kit, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye.